Welcome to Inspirational Leadership, where I talk with CEOs who are walking the talk and creating positive cultures. I'm thrilled for today's guest. I'm going to be speaking with Sarah Saska, who is the CEO of Feminuity. Welcome to the show. Wonderful to see you today, Sarah.
Oh, thank you for chatting today.
So Sarah, let's right from the beginning. We'd love to hear a little bit more around your career journey. So what got you to where you are now as the CEO of Feminuity?
I guess at a really high level, I was raised by feminist parents. So I think social justice and advocacy work has sort of always been very much, in the blood. I spent a lot of years doing work around women's rights and gender equality, and that evolved into work with queer communities and Indigenous communities, and kind of just kept going. And I spent a lot of time in academia as well. But in my PhD in particular, I started down the rabbit hole trying to understand why the field of innovation studies and why the field of technological studies from an academic perspective were considering themselves to be gender neutral or gender blind, and sort of why I wasn't seeing any conversation relating to social justice, race, sexuality, gender, ability, all of the, the different ways of doing and being in the world, why these conversations weren't talked about in the academic fields around innovation and technology, given, these things are for people and humans in the world. So ultimately, my PhD research sort of looked at the importance and I guess the need for diversity, equity, and inclusion-based lenses, or equity-based lenses as a whole, in tech and innovation. And what we quickly realized, my co-founder and I, about 5 years ago or so, is that there was just a huge gap in the industry too, right? So there was a gap in academia, but then there wasn't much of a conversation around how to translate that into practice. Yeah. So we launched Feminuity just over 5 years ago at Mars Discovery District. And we ultimately, that's what we do. We work to embed diversity, equity, and inclusion into the core of our clients' businesses. And we work largely with folks in the sort of tech and innovation ecosystem. And we have clients in about 5 or 6 countries.
Wow. Wow. It's so exciting to see that journey. And when you really noticed that there was a gap in the marketplace and took action on it. And what's that been like to start a company? Because I'm assuming, is this the first company that you've started?
Yes. Yeah. Unless you count, selling lemonade.
Yeah. You started early.
When I was a kid, but I guess those are entrepreneurial on their own. But
absolutely.
I think for me, there's kind of been 2 big, I guess, chunky pieces that I think are a bit unique around, I guess, my own journey. The one is very much coming out of such an academic-centric space where, the ivory tower, academia, and so forth. Like, I wasn't highly encouraged in my PhD program to, figure out how to translate the research into practice and go start a business, right? And that's not because I wasn't surrounded by great humans. It's largely because, their own lived experiences were very much in academia, and they just didn't know how to support me. So I think that was its own sort of steep and wonderful learning curve. Learning how to translate really, really complex research ideas and data and all of these things into simple, snackable, marketable, easy ways, easy things for people to understand. Yeah. So I think that at a really high level was fascinating. Also, like, how do you translate, conceptual, theoretical ideas into something tangible that you can sell to people and actually earn a living and allow your staff and employees to pay their mortgage with, right? So that's been really interesting. And I think the other side of it is that by virtue of, I guess, even what we're doing at the core of it, we're working to embed social justice into tech and innovation companies. And there's a reason we still have so much systemic inequality in the world, and that's because this is really, really hard work. Yeah. So I think at a really high level, we sometimes forget that we're also doing something that's inherently wildly challenging, right? Because it sort of turns people upside down, everything they know and believe and understand. So when we were talking about this 5+ years ago, this is before conversations around bias and algorithms were a hot topic, and before we were talking about, advancing women in tech, and these conversations, they didn't have any momentum then. So it was also a moment where folks were looking at me like, "What are you doing? I just don't understand." So I think those are two of the sort of big pieces that have really been critical learning, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, like such a great example of when you're truly innovating at that, when you're the beginner like that, when it hasn't happened yet, literally people are like, what are you talking about, right? What that feels like to be going against the grain and pushing forward when you're the one that's really you're the catalyst for something that's really new out there. That's, yeah, I could see how there'd be a lot of learning. And as you were talking about that, it really got me thinking about the first question I'd love to ask you is, you are a leader, and you're also in a position where you get to be out there seeing a lot of leaders and seeing what's happening in organizations as well. From your perspective, what does it look like to be an inspirational leader?
Yeah, I guess so. When I think of all of the different CEOs that we've worked with over the last half decade or so, I guess I can start by telling you what I think is not.
Yes, yes, let's go there.
We find too often that, especially I think in the tech world, that there's this sort of idea that we move fast, we break things, that we're always iterating and pivoting, and there's just sort of all these buzzwords flying around, and innovation seems to be this sort of golden word that trumps anything relating to humans. And I think too often we'll work with, we'll see really incredible leaders in the tech space that have these really fascinating ideas that do hold a ton of potential to advance the world in really interesting ways. But what they're often not doing is sort of two things. One, they're not thinking through what the shadow side of their innovation might be, right? So something like Uber, right? We all know sort of the utility and the ways that it's supported a lot of folks in the world, but then we also know at the same time that Uber drivers are tenuously employed, right? That it's causing its own sort of different, like a whole host of problems within sort of the gig economy.
Yeah.
Not to mention their toxic culture, but so not looking at the shadow side of whatever it is you're trying to do or build is really deeply problematic if you're a leader, right? Yeah. Because whatever you're trying to offer to the world, like, you're responsible for that.
Yeah.
Responsible for what happens once you put your baby out into the world. Like, you need to sort of think through how this may evolve over time. And I think the other thing we see too often, and it honestly breaks my heart, because to me it's sort of a simple one, is that there's a lot of really toxic leaders in tech because they just haven't done their own work. Yeah. Right? They've never taken the time to sort of reflect and look inside, to heal their unresolved trauma, to sort of do that work. And that translates into how they lead. And ultimately, and I know they're very much oversimplifying, but I think it's very much how we end up seeing really deeply sort of toxic cultures within certain tech companies. That's a lot of where it comes from. So to me, those are the two pieces. So folks who are inspirational to me are the ones who've done the work, right? Who, perhaps have a practice around meditation, who own the fact that they need support from a whole range of community of folks to sort of do life, right? That they need to constantly sort of check themselves, apologize often, and also be accountable for when their product or that technology harms people in the world, or harms their employees, or whatever it may be. I think so. Those are big pieces for me.
And what do you think, from your perspective, what prevents that from what prevents them from getting the help and making that shift to from what I'm hearing, and it's something that I'm a big proponent of, and I'm really trying to go out there and say it's not soft skills, it's actually human skills, and we need more human skills, because soft right away, it takes away, I think words have such power. So let's not even use that. These are human skills, and we need these human skills. What do you think prevents so many, whether it's in tech or in other industries, from getting the help?
Yeah, I mean, I think at a really high level, ego is a huge piece. Um, I mean, I'm constantly my own self. I have a little note on my monitor that says, "Is this your ego calling?" Right. Whenever I'm broached with an opportunity, I need to sort of even think through that lens of whether I say yes or no. Right.
Yeah.
Is this for for PR promotion, or does this help our organization? Is this in line with where we want to go? Right.
Yeah.
So I do think ego is a big piece. I also think, and so I'm deeply critical. I consider myself sort of to be a recovering academic. So I'm deeply critical of academic institutions, although I certainly see the value. I think, we're just not learning these sort of human skills in a lot of the traditional curriculums, right? We're focused so much on credentials and areas of expertise, but we don't teach people how to navigate death and loss and trauma. And so that means so many leaders don't know how to support an employee who just had a miscarriage in the workplace, or someone who's transitioning their gender identity in real time, or someone who has family stuck at a border. Like, folks don't know how to navigate those conversations, because it's just not something they've ever experienced or given tools around.
Yeah, that's such a great example, because I think it starts from like education right from when you're a kid, and as you start to work your way through. I mean, it is positive that I see for my kids, 6 and 9-year-olds, that there's more talk around meditation and mindfulness and emotional intelligence and fixed mindset and growth mindset, and what it looks like to come from a place of service as opposed to being so me focused. I like the whole from me to we with a lot of that. So the we movement, so that it kind of gets out of that being so me focused, which actually, when people really look at it, that when you're me focused, you're actually not going to feel as happy or fulfilled, because that's not what we're here to do, right? We're wired for being in a bigger way and have that purpose. From your experience, and with you being a leader as well, what are some of those steps organizations can take to create those more positive cultures, whether that's assisting the leaders, whether that's like, what would be some of the things that that you're doing for yourself in your business, but then also what you notice with the organizations that you work with?
Yeah, I think, again, at a super super high level, the biggest barrier that we find is that either folks there's just no openness, right? They're entirely shut off to conversations relating to diversity, equity, inclusion, or whatever language that they're sort of using. But more often than not, I find that it's because they're feeling defensive, they're feeling uncomfortable, they're feeling overwhelmed, or they just don't know where to start. Like, it just feels like this big mountain that they don't even know how to sort of start to navigate.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about, this is a journey. Everyone's at a different stage on it. There is no such thing as perfect in any of this, right? This is ultimately social justice work, and you will always harm people. You will always hurt people, right? You can never, like, there is no such thing as perfection. So it's about how you sort of work to step into it, own your mistakes, and apologize as you go. Learn and just keep getting better. Like, so I think for us and our team, every single day, like, that's our approach. It's inevitable, with the number of clients and the number of scenarios and the number of things that we're working with each day. I always, at least once a day, say not the wrong thing, but definitely not something that, always lands the best way possible. We're always making mistakes. And so it's how we sort of own them, build that sort of rapport with someone in that moment, and then move forward with them.
Yeah.
So I mean, to me, that's just everything. And then that's, in the end, ultimately how we build really deep, meaningful relationships with our clients. We build a lot of trust with them. And I think we're in real time role modeling for them what we really hope for them to be doing.
Yeah. Such a great example. I mean, it really felt like you were talking a lot about some humility there. And the more that you can show up with humility, such a great example too, that you're modeling that to the people that you're trying to show that, right? So that the more that they're seeing you show up in that way, it's giving them permission to do the same. What are you excited about in the work you're doing and some of the positive shifts that you are noticing?
Yeah. I mean, I guess, everyone has, well, maybe not everyone has one, but I think, or maybe they just don't realize. For me, my, I guess, theory of change is very much that I think we're in this really interesting moment where, some tech companies are valued at more than entire countries. And
Yeah,
they're these wild gray spaces without a lot of policy or regulation. And they're also coming up with really fascinating things that, these tools can either sort of advance inequities, like they can actually work to make them better, or they can actually exacerbate, a whole range of global inequities. So for me, that's what keeps me both terrified and excited all at the same time,
yeah,
that there's just so much possibility right now. And so for us, like, we really want to be part of sort of shaping that in sort of the most human and equitable way possible. So I'm really excited that when I look back to 5 years ago, when we couldn't, when folks just deeply didn't understand
yeah,
what we were anyway, and we had to only speak through really clear and tactical examples of, like, a seatbelt. It didn't work for a pregnant body, caused
yeah,
someone accident. Like we had to break things down really, really simply. And I mean, we still do.
yeah,
Really stoked that folks are starting to get it in a more sort of fundamental and wholehearted way, slowly.
yeah.
It's a slow incremental shift, and it's fascinating when folks sort of pop up and sort of join these intersections of this space now, and they're like so frustrated. But to me, I'm like, this is a long, slow play. So you
Yes.
need the foresight on it.
Yeah. And if you could make some recommendations, if companies were going to take some baby steps, and specifically around supporting their leaders, what do you think they could start doing?
Yeah. So, I mean, we're a full service consultancy. So, I mean, we have our moonshot of what we always hope an organization can do. But I think really, really tiny tactical things that people can do. Have your leaders start to follow people who are unlike themselves on Twitter and on Instagram, right? Like, have them go through just open their social platforms, scan through, see who they're following. Like, see, well, so often it's folks who look, feel, and think much like they do. And I think it's such a small, tiny way, but you can open up your worldview very quickly by just sort of following folks and engaging with folks who are unlike you. And then keep going with that, right? Engage different people within your organization who are unlike you, build those different bridges. And I think that sort of helps to soften even the deepest skeptics to start to understand, hey, like, I see that I'm better for this. I wonder what this could do for my company too.
Yeah. That's such a fantastic example, right? Because I think what happens too often is people are, there's the thoughts around be around like-minded people, and to a degree, yes, you want people that have the same values, but the way those values are manifested and the way they show up can look very different in different genders, different cultures, different areas, different parts of the world. So the more that they can be, so what I really hear you saying is the more they can be open-minded and start to just expose themselves to things that might be a little bit different. And I used to give that advice, and I still do, when I was talking about HR leaders. Like, HR leaders can also sometimes just be like right here in their box. And I said, like, go out every week and have a coffee date with a different person in the business to like really see like what's going on there, what are the pain points, right? Because it's when you're up here, you don't necessarily see what's going on in the trenches. And it feels like the same thing when you start looking at it globally, which is why I'm such a big proponent on traveling too, because you start to travel, you get outside of this box and start to really open up and see different ways of doing things. So that's really, really, really good advice.
Yeah, I totally agree. Whenever I feel really stuck in some way, whether I just get out of the city or book a trip, yeah, for sure. I think that's such a great way of sort of helping unstick yourself, for sure.
Yeah. So if you think about on your journey, and especially you are a leader now, and so you would have some people reporting into you as a leader, what have been some of your big lessons?
Yeah, I'd say I'm in this one right now. I think I've fully, not fully, but I think I've really started to actualize the difference between talking about the need for vulnerability and actually just fucking doing it. um, yeah. So that's been a big piece, like learning how to step into the conversations that are anxiety inducing to me and to not just, bulldoze into them, of course, but certainly not to put them off, because no one on your team is going to be better for that. Creating space every single day for folks to sort of share things that come up in real time. I think, but yeah, the vulnerability, like role modeling it for myself, I think is
Yeah.
really a big piece.
Yeah.
A few years ago, and even probably a year ago, I thought that I needed to sort of always kind of have it together,
Yeah.
and sort of to show, to project that.
Yeah.
Realistically, my relationships are deepening when I'm far more honest about, something that's going on in my personal life, or talking to them about, I don't know how I feel about, certain future things, or I think that's been huge. And I had to sort of unlearn certain even masculine leadership traits that I had sort of just unconsciously imported for myself too.
Wow. So tell me more about that. What does it look like so do you feel like you're integrating more of just the masculine and feminine, or what has that journey look like for you?
There was something about me that thought that I needed to be quite stoic. And I'm not sure quite where that came from,
Yeah.
but it wasn't working for me. And I realized that I was also feeling deeply lonely in myself, sort of with that mask on. So that's been an interesting piece. And I do think that's for me, that feels like a very sort of masculine kind of leadership trait. Although I don't think we need to get, I guess, I don't like to get too essentialist about,
Yeah.
the gender components on leadership, but maybe it's more, I guess, a toxic masculine sort of leadership, perhaps.
Well, it sounds like it wasn't authentic for you. Like when you start to realize that it was like you're putting, to use Brene Brown's work, like you were putting up an armor and it wasn't you getting to be as authentically you.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And it's a lonely place. So that's just not the way. That's not the way to do it. Yeah.
And as you've started to do more of that and embrace the vulnerability and embrace the letting the armor down, what feels different?
That's such a good question. I just feel that it's deepened relationships. It's opened more space for people to say all the things as they come up. Um, and I think it also helps you just build, it really ensures that you're never sort of seeing a team member as an employee, or simply just a team member, but really
Yeah.
as a whole human.
Yeah.
Critical.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I believe so strongly it's such a huge component of leadership. And while people might be on this side of it and it feels so scary and so uncomfortable and so not where they want to go, when they get to the other side of it, what the gift is that they actually start to feel not only more connected to the people around them, but actually more connected to themselves, because they're showing up as who they truly are, which is what we were all born to do, right? Is to be who we are, and we are very unique. And instead of, sometimes people are modeling who they think they should be, but it doesn't feel good because it's not aligned.
Totally. And I think, I don't know if this will make sense, but I do a lot of work with the field of body energetics. And one of the things that we sort of talk about is how, so in terms of, so your interpersonal, maybe perhaps more romantic relationships, perhaps modeled to partnership, that they're very much, the purpose for a lot of folks is to help, help you and the other person or other people sort of actualize and become sort of the most true version of yourself, whatever that sort of looks like.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting thought in terms of how you view your team, right? Because it's like the idea isn't that I don't want everyone to stay with us forever. I want this to be this kind of really cool learning phase for folks, and as long as people want to stay, awesome. But that's not. This is also to help them sort of shift to whatever's their sort of higher purpose, in terms of their broader career. But really, that's their life.
So beautifully operating outside of the ego. Because when you're operating like that, it's understanding that they're going to grow and they need to go where they need to grow. And the best leaders create other leaders, and they're on their journey. Sarah, this conversation has been so wonderful. Thank you for being so open with what you've shared today. Any last thoughts you want to leave with the audience?
You know what? I think we've seen a lot of folks, like the retention conversation is just so, well, the recruitment conversation is obviously very prevalent, but also the retention piece. And yet I think folks haven't figured it out. We've just finished a research study around this, so it's very top of mind. But I think that's an important piece to remember, that these are humans who are with you for time on their journey. So retaining them at all costs shouldn't be the goal either, right? There needs to be, I guess, a delicate dance between how can we make sure this is a great experience, but that it's also, we can support you to leave when it's your time.
Yeah.
So I just feel like it's sort of a black and white thing. It's like, oh, we must lead our people. Well, yeah, but only for so long.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's a really good distinction, because that is just part of their journey. They can be fully engaged and fully immersed when they're there with you, and now they're being called somewhere else, and that's great. That's their time. It's not that you didn't do anything wrong to make them have to leave. It's just that's what's next for them on their journey.
Yeah. And I feel like there hasn't been a lot of nuance around that part of why people also leave organizations. It's just on the toxic side of why people leave all the time, but there are beautiful reasons why people leave too. So
yeah, I think that's good. And anytime there's too much black and white thinking, it's not a good thing. Thank you so much for being a guest today, Sarah.
I appreciate it. Trying to find the button.